Hello. I thought I'd make a video. Next week, the Moon Knight show comes out, and I don't know if I have a top 10. We'll kind of go down the list, but um, I wanted to kind of more just talk about, before the show comes out, who Moon Knight is. These might have spoilers for the show because I guess it is a storyline. Most shows are the origin story, so I thought I'd talk about the origin story. Mark Spector is the main character, and in the comic books, Mark Spector was a Marine, a CIA agent, so he has that kind of rough and tumble life, and he became a mercenary, working with a couple of folks, Frenchie and Bushmaster. That Bushmaster ultimately becomes the reason Mark Spector became Moon Knight. So what happens is Mark Spector is appalled at what Bushmaster does. He kills an archaeologist in front of his daughter and colleague, Madeline something or other, and she's ultimately becomes a love interest of Mark Spector and has his daughter. Mark is killed, or in one of the storylines he's killed, and one of them he's just kind of left for dead, and is somehow, in one storyline, he drags himself into this archaeological dig site and sits in front of the throne of Khonshu and becomes healed, and then goes back to the United States. Another one, he's drugged there by locals. Either way, Khonshu becomes involved, and he becomes the left hand of Khonshu, his Moon Knight. Now, Mark Spector, in the comic books, it's kind of confusing. Like, it might be espionage that he's using to infiltrate things. Later on, it's dissociate, or they call it schizophrenia, but it's dissociate disease, where he has multiple personalities. And one of them, his name is Mark Spector, which is what he knows the most of. And another one is Jake. He's a cab driver, and it seems like an infiltration. In the early comic books, it was just a way of infiltrating and getting information. But and another one, he's a businessman, multimillionaire. One of them, he's whatever. Mr. Spector, which is like he's in a suit and tie, and he's like doing business deals, and I don't know, the whole thing is interesting. And so I guess if we were to break things down, I think we will have that origin story where Mark becomes I think we actually start the story off with him being one of his split personalities, not knowing that his name is Mark. The rich person's name was Stephen. The cab driver, I think his name was Jacob, and then there's Mark. So that's the three that are prevalent. Now there are different. I don't think they use names, but there are different personas that he uses for infiltration at different times that later on is retconned into being a part of that split personalities. But in the in the original comics, it's more that it's just a persona he makes up so that he can infiltrate things. So I think so. If I were to make a couple of top tens, I think I'd start with, we're going to have split personality disorder. So I'd say number one, we're going to have Mark, we're going to have Steven. I don't know if they'll have Jacob, but they might. I imagine we're going to have Mr. Knight and then Moon Knight. So there'll be 5 personas, 4 or 5, but that's top 10. We'll start with those 5. And they'll not know of each other. So originally in the comic books, it was, like I said, it was more of a game of, hey, I'm going to use these personas. I imagine in this, it'll be more of a he's stuck with it. In the first comic book, it was heavily implied that he had no special powers, and so originally he healed, but nobody really explained that. And I think originally in the late 70s, it was more of a he got beat up really bad, and he healed from it somehow, maybe in time, who knows. And he showed back at the United States. There's like a time jump, and so it could be that he's just crazy and believes that he was the Moon Knight, and the only powers he had were visions, and it was very heavily implied that those visions were psychotic. But so I think we'll see those visions, visions of the future, visions of the past, and that kind of thing. So that'll be number 6, his ability to have visions. I think we will see Khonshu. He is actually the Moon Knight, so that's number 7, Khonshu. I imagine that the main bad guy will be his mirror evil, and so in the comic books he does deal with a lot of bad guys, but really his goal, he's like a street level fighter, kind of like Daredevil, kind of like Spider-Man, and of course Spider-Man every now and again goes into cosmic stuff, but for the most part he's a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Well, the same thing here. Mark came back to the United States to fight crime and to right the wrong. So, if a little girl's being mistreated, he would go in and break her dad's arm, something like that. And so I suspect we'll see some of that. So I think we'll start out with him in a persona, and then him not even knowing he's Mark Spector per se. So he may be Stephen, for instance, and or Jacob, and then somebody calls. I think one of the commercials, somebody calls him Mark, and he's like, "Why are you calling me Mark?" So I think that's what we're going to start with, him basically waking up from this dream, and that dream was his real persona. And it may be that in the MCU that actually the reason he has the split personality is because of Khonshu. So the trauma of having these powers. Definitely he's going to have powers. So in the comics it was left, until later in the comics, it was left as a question as to whether or not the guy had powers. But later he actually dies and comes back to life. And then his power set later would change depending on the moon. So we're up to 7. I think number 8 will be the moon itself will play a big part in his abilities. He may die, and I would say number 9, he will die and come back to life. And so that moon will play a big part. So if it's a full moon, he has full power. If it's a crescent moon, or half moon, he has less power, and so on and so forth. If you can't see the moon, he doesn't have any abilities, and he may, when there is no moon, he may revert to his normal Mark Spector persona. And then number 10, I think the opposite will be true of his nemesis in this movie. So his nemesis probably will have more power on the waning moon and less power on the full moon, that kind of thing. So I'm kind of excited to have this come out. So I'd say number 11. Number 11 will be that it will not be directly tied in with the rest of the MCU. The reason I say that is it is very possible that they're setting up the Midnight Suns. It's very possible that we see Werewolf by Night but as a throwaway. But I don't think we're going to see the Avengers or any of the main MCU characters or even talk about it much. And the reason is this could be a side universe. This also is more of an experiment. Moon Knight is a pretty throwaway character. It's one that not a lot of people really love. They don't hate it. It's just not a common one in the outside the comic book realm, where Spider-Man is known everywhere. Superman is known everywhere. So it's easy to do those type of movies. But people like Moon Knight, which is a takeoff of Batman, or I don't know, just a lot of those movies just don't work because people aren't interested in seeing it. It may work better on a television series. Oscar Isaac is playing it, and I think he's pretty good. Yeah, I liked him in the Star Wars, and I think he could lend a pretty good gravitas to this show. I think he was really crappy as Apocalypse, but in his defense, I think that was just a pretty crappy scripted movie. So it could be that he does great with this, and it takes off, and we get the Midnight Suns, and we get a Blade, we get Punisher, and we get I hope we get Werewolf by Night and stuff like that. Ghost Rider. So I could see that happening, but I could see Marvel being tentative with it, and so where they're definitely building the Young Avengers, and where they're definitely building the Thunderbolts. And man, that's sad that Thunderbolt Ross passed away there. I don't know if they're definitely building the Midnight Suns. So I think it very much depends on how well this show does. This show is a tough one for Disney because it's street fighting. It's not pretty. Moon Knight comes in bloodied and messed up all the time, and the people he's fighting are the same way. It's much more like the Netflix shows like the Punisher or the Daredevil. So it could be really great. They did recently get the rights for the Netflix shows. They did bring them into Disney, and they didn't. I kind of thought they would, but they didn't modify them at all. They're still that same level of violence. That's the level of violence needed to make Moon Knight. So if it gets made, I hope it has that level of, I don't, if it gets made, when it comes out in a week, I hope it has that level of grittiness, of grime, and of violence. So I hope it does, and if it does, I think it'll get a following. I sure hope it does. Okay, folks, so I have those top 10. I'll write them down later, and then as we go along, we'll check them off. Pretty sure I had all of them. I don't know if Jake, the cab driver, will show up, but I'm sure Steven and Mark will, and I'm sure Mr. Knight will, and I'm sure, the Moon Knight will, and that they won't know about each other. It may be during the show they start learning about each other, and the original comics, Mr. Knight was a persona, but later comics he was actually like kind of like Professor Hulk, where they combined personas in his demented head, and Mr. Knight was able to more control all of that. So it could be that comes about. So, all right, guys, thank you much.